Ladies and gentlemen, tonight isn't just another moment, it's the beginning of a shift. The kind that makes the world uncomfortable, the kind that turns whispers into headlines. They doubted you, overlooked you, maybe even laughed. But that's perfect, because legends aren't born in comfort, they're forged in pressure. There's something different about you, something they can't explain, but they can't ignore either. And now, the spotlight is creeping closer. This isn't luck, this isn't chance, this is your rise. Calculated, unstoppable, inevitable. The whole world is about to watch. And whether they're ready or not, you're becoming an icon. They looked at you and made their judgments in seconds. As if your entire story could be understood at a glance. They saw what was easy to see, the surface, the imperfections, the moments where you hesitated, and they decided that was all you would ever be. Doubt became their language, and they spoke it fluently whenever your name came up. Some of them smiled in your face, while quietly expecting you to fail, while others didn't even bother to hide it. They dismissed your ideas, underestimated your potential, and reduced your ambition to something small enough to ignore. But what they never realized is that doubt, when placed on the right person, doesn't destroy. It sharpens. And every time they question you, something inside you adjusted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that was precise and controlled. You started observing more, speaking less, learning faster than they could predict. While they were busy labeling you, you were quietly building something they couldn't see. That's the danger of underestimating someone who refuses to announce their moves. You became comfortable in the shadows of their disbelief, using it as cover while you strengthened your mindset, your discipline, your focus. Their low expectations gave you the freedom to grow without pressure from the outside world, and you turned that into an advantage. They thought they understood your limits, but the truth is they only understood their own imagination. People project their fears onto others because it's easier than confronting their own boundaries. When they said you couldn't do it, what they really meant was they couldn't see themselves doing it. When they laughed, it wasn't because your vision was weak. It was because it was unfamiliar, and unfamiliar things make you became a reflection of everything they didn't have the courage to attempt. And instead of admitting that, they chose to doubt you. Blend it. But doubt has a strange way of backfiring when it meets someone who refuses to internalize it. Instead of accepting their words, you dissected them. You studied the patterns, recognized the limitations in their thinking, and made a decision to operate on a different level. You stopped seeking validation from people who couldn't even validate their own potential. You stopped explaining your goals to those who only listened so they could respond with skepticism. Instead, you redirected that energy inward, focusing on execution, consistency, and growth. And what they didn't see were the moments when you kept going, despite exhaustion, when you chose discipline over comfort, when you sacrificed temporary pleasure for long-term gain. They didn't see the nights you spent refining your craft, the days you pushed yourself beyond what felt reasonable, the constant mental battles you fought and won in silence. All they saw was the version of you that hadn't arrived yet, and they assumed that version was permanent. There's a certain irony in being doubted by people who never took the time to understand you. Their opinions were formed without depth, without effort, without curiosity. And yet, those same opinions became fuel. Not the loud, emotional kind of fuel that burns quickly and fades, but the slow, controlled kind that lasts. The kind that builds something sustainable, something undeniable. You didn't need to prove them wrong immediately. You just needed to keep moving forward, step by step, knowing that time would reveal what they failed to recognize. Eventually there comes a moment when progress becomes visible, when results start to speak louder than assumptions. And when that moment arrives, the same people who doubted you begin to shift. Not because they suddenly understand your journey, but because they can no longer deny the outcome. Their words change, their tone softens, their confidence in judging you disappears. But by then, their opinions no longer matter because you've already outgrown the need for their approval. Mungda. What they thought was your limitation turned out to be their miscalculation. They underestimated your patience, your resilience, your ability to adapt and evolve. They assumed you would stay where you started, unaware that you were constantly becoming something more. And in the end, their doubt didn't define you. It exposed them. Pressure has a way of revealing truths people try to hide, stripping away comfort, and exposing what's really underneath. Most people fear it because it forces confrontation with limits, with doubt, with the version of themselves they've been avoiding. When everything gets intense, when expectations rise and the stakes feel heavier, that's when masks fall off. Some people crumble, some retreat, some look for excuses, but you did something different. You didn't run from the weight, you leaned into it. Even when it felt unbearable. Valand. There were moments when it felt like everything was closing in at once. Expectations from others, expectations from yourself, the silent pressure of time moving forward. Whether you were ready or not, it wasn't just external, it was internal. The voice in your head questioning whether you could handle it, whether you were strong enough, whether all the effort would actually lead somewhere. That kind of pressure doesn't just test skill, it tests identity. It asks you who you really are when nothing feels easy anymore. A lot of people assume pressure is supposed to break you. They see it as something negative, something to avoid, something that signals you're in over your head. But pressure doesn't create weakness. It exposes it. If something inside you is unstable, pressure will make it collapse. If something inside you is strong, pressure will make it stronger. It doesn't choose sides. It simply reveals what's already there. And when it came for you, it found something it couldn't destroy. Menda. You felt it in the moments when giving up seemed logical, when stepping back would have been easier, when no one would have blamed you for choosing comfort instead of struggle. But instead of walking away, you stayed. Not because it was easy, not because you enjoyed the tension, but because something inside you refused to quit. That decision, staying when everything told you to leave, changed everything. It shifted your mindset from surviving pressure to using it. You started to understand that pressure isn't just an obstacle. It's a tool. It forces focus. It eliminates distractions. It demands that you become more precise, more disciplined, more aware. Under pressure, there's no room for hesitation or half-effort. You either rise to meet the moment, or you get left behind by it. And you chose to rise, even when you weren't sure how. There's a certain clarity that comes with being pushed to your limits. You start to see what actually matters and what doesn't. You stop wasting energy on things that don't move you forward. You become more intentional with your actions, more deliberate with your time. Pressure has a way of cutting through noise, leaving only what's essential. And in that space, you discovered parts of yourself that were always there, just waiting to be activated. Man's strength isn't something you claim. It's something you prove, especially when circumstances are against you. Anyone can appear confident when things are going well, when there's no resistance, when the path is smooth. But real strength shows up when the situation is uncomfortable, uncertain, unpredictable. That's when your mindset matters most. That's when your discipline is tested. That's when your character becomes visible. What makes your journey different is that you didn't just endure pressure. You adapted to it. You learned how to stay calm in chaos, how to think clearly when everything felt overwhelming, how to keep moving forward without needing perfect conditions. You stopped waiting for things to get easier and started becoming someone who could handle harder situations. That shift changed your entire approach. Instead of asking why things were difficult, you started asking how you could grow through it. Being it. People who break under pressure often look for something outside themselves to blame. The situation was too hard, the timing was wrong, the odds were unfair. But you didn't waste time on that. You focused on what you could control, your effort, your mindset, your consistency. And by doing that, you took ownership of the outcome. Pressure didn't dictate your direction, it refined it. Man, there's a quiet confidence that comes from knowing you faced intensity and didn't fold. It's not loud, it doesn't need validation, it doesn't rely on recognition. It's built on experience, on moments where you prove to yourself that you're capable of more than you thought. That kind of confidence can't be taken away because it's earned, not given, planned. What once felt overwhelming now feels familiar. Situations that used to shake you no longer have the same effect. Not because they've changed, but because you have. You've developed a level of resilience that can't be easily disrupted. Pressure no longer feels like a threat. It feels like an opportunity to operate at a higher level, to push beyond previous limits, to continue evolving. And the truth is the pressure never really goes away. It just changes form as you grow. But now, from the beginning, there was always something about you that didn't quite align with the expectations placed around you. While others followed patterns, repeated routines, and blended into what was considered normal, you felt a quiet resistance to all of it. Not loud, not rebellious for attention, but something deeper, something instinctive. You noticed things differently, questioned things others accepted without thought, and carried ideas that didn't fit neatly into the spaces you were given. And for a while, that difference felt like a problem that needed fixing. People tend to reward familiarity. They feel comfortable around what they understand, what they've seen before, what doesn't challenge their perception of how things should be. So when you showed up with a mindset that didn't follow those lines, it created tension. Not always visible, not always spoken, but present. You may have been told to adjust, to be more like everyone else, to tone it down, to simplify who you are, so it becomes easier for others to accept. And at times, you might have tried. You might have experimented with blending in, with reshaping parts of yourself to match expectations, just to see if it made things smoother, bland. But something always felt off when you did that. It was like reducing yourself to a version that was easier to manage, but harder to recognize. The more you tried to fit in, the more you felt disconnected from your own identity. Because fitting in often requires compromise, subtle at first, but significant over time. You start holding back ideas, filtering your thoughts, limiting your expression, and slowly you become quieter. Not because you have nothing to say, but because what you want to say doesn't match what's expected. Manja. What makes your journey different is that you didn't stay in that space. At some point, you realized that the discomfort wasn't coming from being different. It was coming from trying not to be. That shift in understanding changes everything. Instead of viewing your uniqueness as a flaw, you started seeing it as something valuable, something intentional. You began to recognize that the same traits that made you feel out of place were also the ones that set you apart. Standing out isn't always comfortable. It draws attention, invites judgment, and sometimes creates distance between you and others who prefer predictability. But it also creates opportunity. When you stop trying to fit into existing spaces, you start creating your own. You bring new perspectives, challenge outdated thinking, and introduce ideas that wouldn't exist if everyone chose to conform. That's where real impact begins, not in repetition, but in originality. There's a certain strength in choosing authenticity over acceptance. It means you're willing to be misunderstood for a period of time. It means you're okay with not being everyone's preference. It means you prioritize truth, over approval. And while that path can feel isolating at times, it also leads to something more meaningful: alignment. When you operate as yourself without constant adjustment, everything becomes more consistent. Your actions, your decisions, your direction, they all start to reflect who you actually are, not who you're expected to be. And you also begin to attract different kinds of people and opportunities. Not necessarily more, but more aligned. People who resonate with your mindset, who appreciate your perspective, who don't require you to shrink in order to connect. That kind of alignment is more valuable than broad acceptance because it's built on authenticity, not adaptation. And it's easy to underestimate the power of being different in a world that constantly encourages similarity. Trends, systems, expectations, they all push toward uniformity because it's easier to manage. But progress doesn't come from repetition. It comes from those willing to think differently, act differently, and take paths that haven't been fully defined. That's where innovation lives. That's where breakthroughs happen. You've started to understand that standing out isn't about being loud or seeking attention. It's about being real, consistent, and unapologetic in how you show up. It's about trusting your perspective even when it's not widely accepted yet. It's about continuing forward without needing immediate validation, knowing that recognition often comes later, after the results speak for themselves. There's also a level of responsibility that comes with not fitting in. It means you can't rely on existing templates to guide you completely. You have to think more, decide more, take ownership of your path in a deeper way. But that's also where growth happens. You're not just following instructions. You're building something, shaping something, defining something, and over time, the same difference that once made things difficult becomes the reason things start to work in your favor. What was once misunderstood becomes respected. What was once questioned becomes acknowledged. For a long time, you understood the power of silence in a way most people never do. While others rush to be heard, to fill every moment with noise, to prove themselves through constant explanation, you chose a different approach. You stepped back, observed, and let the world reveal itself without interference. Silence became your shield, your space to think, to analyze, to understand patterns that most people overlooked. You weren't inactive. You were. Every move, every decision, every reaction was measured, refined, and stored for the right moment. People often misinterpret silence. They see it as weakness, as hesitation, as a lack of confidence. They assume that if you're not speaking, you must not have anything worth saying. But that assumption says more about their mindset than yours. You understood that not everything needs to be expressed immediately. Not every thought deserves an. There's strength and restraint in choosing when to speak rather than feeling the need to always be heard. And while they were busy talking, you were busy learning. In those quiet phases, you built something internal that didn't rely on external validation. You developed clarity in your thinking, depth in your perspective, and control over your emotions. You learned how to process situations without reacting impulsively, how to listen beyond words, how to pick up on details that others missed because they were too focused on being seen. Silence gave you awareness, and awareness gave you an advantage. There were times when staying quiet felt like the harder choice, moments when you could have responded, defended yourself, corrected someone's misunderstanding, or made your presence known. But instead you held back, not out of fear, but out of discipline. You understood that timing matters, that speaking too early can dilute your impact, that revealing everything at once can remove the element of surprise. So you waited, you watched, you prepared. While others were driven by the need for immediate recognition, you were driven by something deeper: precision. You didn't just want to be heard. You wanted to be understood. And that requires more than noise. It requires substance. So instead of rushing into conversations just to occupy space, you focused on building something meaningful behind the scenes. You refined your ideas, strengthened your position, and made sure that when you finally spoke, it would carry weight. Bond. There's a difference between speaking often and speaking effectively. Anyone can talk. Anyone can express opinions. Anyone can fill silence with words. But not everyone can command attention with intention. That's what you were developing. Presence. The kind that doesn't rely on volume, but on value. The kind that doesn't need repetition to be remembered. The kind that shifts the atmosphere the moment it enters the room. And now the moment you've been preparing for is approaching. The transition from silence to expression isn't random. It's earned. Everything you've observed, everything you've learned, everything you've built internally is ready to be translated outward. This isn't about breaking silence for the sake of being noticed. It's about speaking with purpose, with clarity, with confidence that comes from preparation rather than impulse. And there's a certain impact that comes from someone who doesn't speak, often suddenly choosing to speak. People pay attention because it's unexpected. They listen more closely because they know it's not casual. Your words carry more weight because they aren't overused. That's the power of restraint. It amplifies expression when the time is right, when you're no longer in a phase where silence is your only strategy. Now it becomes a foundation. You still carry that awareness, that ability to observe, that control over when and how you express yourself. But now you're adding another layer, execution through communication. You're stepping into a space where your voice becomes a tool, not just for expression, but for influence. And influence isn't about dominating conversations or overpowering others. It's about delivering something that resonates, something that shifts perspectives, something that stays with people even after the moment passes. That's what happens when words are backed by depth, when they're not just spoken, but built over time. Minds, you've spent enough time preparing, refining, understanding. Now it's about stepping forward with intention, not to prove anything to those who underestimated you, not to seek validation from those who overlooked you, but to express what you've already become. Your voice is no longer something you hold back. It's something you use with precision, with control, with purpose. Every setback you faced looked like an ending when it first arrived. It disrupted your plans, slowed your momentum, and forced you into moments you never would have chosen. From the outside, it probably seemed like you were falling behind, like things weren't working in your favor. And maybe for a while, even you questioned it. You looked at the situation and tried to understand why things weren't aligning, why the effort you put in didn't immediately translate into results. But what felt like a delay was actually something else entirely, something quieter, more strategic, something building beneath the surface. And setbacks have a way of isolating you. They create distance between you and the version of yourself you thought you would be by now. They force you to pause, to reevaluate, to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. And that's the part most people avoid. They rush to fix things, to move on quickly, to pretend nothing happened. But you didn't skip that phase. You stayed in it long enough to understand it. You allowed yourself to analyze what went wrong, what could be improved, what needed to change. That kind of reflection isn't easy, but it's necessary if you want growth that actually lasts. Land. While others see setbacks as proof of failure, you started to see them as information. Each one revealed something about your process, your mindset, your approach. They showed you where you were strong and where you needed to develop further. Instead of taking them personally, you started to take them seriously. That shift alone changed how you responded. You stopped reacting emotionally and started responding strategically. You began to treat every obstacle as part of a larger system, something that could be studied and used rather than feared. Belongs. There's a certain patience that develops when you go through multiple setbacks. You begin to understand that progress isn't always linear, that forward movement doesn't always look like success in the moment. Sometimes it looks like slowing down, like stepping back, like rebuilding parts of your foundation that weren't strong enough yet. And while that can feel frustrating, it also creates something more stable. You're not just moving forward. You're building something that can actually sustain growth. Lenda. What makes your situation different is that you didn't let setbacks redefine your direction. You adjusted, but you didn't abandon your vision. You recalibrated without losing focus. That balance is difficult to maintain, especially when results aren't immediate. But you held on to it. You understood that the bigger the goal, the more resistance you're likely to face. Not because it's impossible, but because it requires a higher level of preparation. Each time something didn't work out, you came back with more awareness. You refined your strategy, improved your execution, and strengthened your mindset. You didn't repeat the same approach expecting a different outcome. You evolved. That evolution is what separates temporary effort from long-term progress. You're not just trying again, you're trying differently, with more clarity and more intention. Then there's also something powerful about continuing despite setbacks. It builds resilience in a way success alone never could. When things go right, it's easy to feel confident. But when things go wrong and you still keep going, that confidence becomes deeper, more grounded. It's no longer based on external outcomes. It's based on your ability to handle whatever comes next. The setbacks you experienced weren't random. They shaped your timing, your readiness, your perspective. They forced you to develop skills you might have ignored if everything had gone smoothly. They slowed you down just enough to ensure that when things finally start to move, you're fully prepared to handle the momentum. And now when you look back, those moments don't feel like failures anymore. They feel like setup, like pieces of a larger process that were necessary to get you here. They weren't blocking your path. They were building it. Every delay, every obstacle, every unexpected turn added something to your journey that you couldn't have gained any other way. And what once felt like being pushed back was actually positioning you forward. Not in a visible, immediate way, but in a way that matters more in the long run. You weren't being held back. You were being aligned. And now, everything you went through is starting to connect, forming a path that makes more sense than it ever did before. One that's stronger, more intentional, and built on experience rather than assumption. There's a shift that happens before the world notices, quiet at first, almost invisible, but undeniable once it gains momentum. You've been moving through that phase, building, refining, evolving without needing constant attention. While others were focused on what's already visible, you were focused on what's coming next. And now that transition is beginning to surface. The spotlight you never chased is slowly finding you. Attention has a way of revealing everything. It doesn't just highlight success. It magnifies preparation. When eyes start turning in your direction, when people begin to recognize your presence, there's no space left for uncertainty to hide. Everything you've worked on in private becomes visible in public, and that's why this moment matters. It's not about suddenly becoming something new. It's about showing what you've already become. A lens. Some people spend their time trying to force attention, trying to position themselves in front of an audience before they're ready. But you took a different route. You focused on substance first. You built your foundation in silence, away from expectations, away from pressure to perform before you were prepared. And because of that, when the spotlight arrives, it doesn't overwhelm you. It aligns with you. There's a certain inevitability to recognition when consistency meets time. You can only stay unnoticed for so long when your work carries depth, when your presence starts to shift environments, when your actions begin to create results that can't be ignored. At some point, people start paying attention, not because you demanded it, but because you earned it. But attention isn't always comfortable. It brings opinions, expectations, and scrutiny. People begin to analyze, to interpret, to form narratives about who you are and what you represent. Some will support you, some will question you, and some will try to define you based on limited understanding. That's part of the process. Visibility comes with perception, and perception isn't always accurate. Meland. What matters is how you respond to it. You don't need to adjust yourself to fit every opinion or expectation. Not expectation. The same consistency that brought you here is what will keep you grounded. You already know who you are, what you've built, and what you're capable of. That clarity becomes your anchor. When everything around you starts to shift, bend, there's also a responsibility that comes with being seen. Your actions carry more weight, your decisions have a broader impact, and your presence influences more than just your immediate environment. That doesn't mean you have to be perfect. It means you have to be intentional. Every step forward is now part of something bigger, something that extends beyond just personal growth. You've spent enough time developing the discipline, the mindset, and the awareness needed to handle this phase. This isn't new pressure. It's a continuation of what you've already experienced, just on a larger scale. The difference now is that it's visible. What was once internal is now external. What was once private is now public. Bland. There's a moment when preparation meets opportunity, and everything starts to align. Not in a sudden, dramatic way, but in a way that feels natural, like the next step in a process that's been building for a long time. That's where you are now. The spotlight isn't interrupting your journey, it's revealing it. Oh, and the truth is, whether people are ready or not doesn't change anything. Their readiness isn't a requirement for your growth. Their acceptance isn't a condition for your progress. You're not moving based on their timeline. You're moving based on yours. The recognition that's coming isn't something you need permission for. Loud. You don't need to chase attention when your work speaks clearly enough to attract it. You don't need to announce your arrival when your presence makes it obvious. Everything you've been building is now reaching a point where it can't stay hidden anymore. The results, the growth, the consistency, they all point in one direction. And as the spotlight continues to move closer, you're not stepping into it as someone unprepared. You're stepping into it as someone who understands exactly what it takes to be there, someone who has already done the work, someone who doesn't need the attention but knows how to handle it. When it arrives, there was a time when greatness felt like something distant, something you had to chase, something reserved for a different version of yourself that didn't exist yet. You looked at it as a destination, a place you might reach someday, if everything aligned perfectly. It felt external, almost out of reach, like something you had to prove you were worthy of before you could even come close to it. But over time, something changed in the way you see it. You started to realize that greatness isn't something you run after. It's something you build, piece by piece. It's not a sudden transformation, not a moment where everything clicks and you instantly become something different. It's a process, often slow, often unnoticed, but constant. It shows up in the small choices, the daily discipline, the way you handle situations when no one is watching. It's in how you respond to challenges, how you maintain focus when distractions are everywhere, how you continue forward even when motivation isn't there. The shift happened when you stopped waiting for the perfect moment to begin. You stopped looking for signs, for confirmation, for validation that you were ready. Instead, you started acting. not in a rushed or reckless way, but in a consistent, intentional way. You began to understand that readiness isn't something that appears before action. It's something that develops through it. The more you showed up, the more you built confidence. The more you committed, the more clarity you gained. Splenda. You also stopped comparing your path to others. That comparison creates unnecessary pressure, distorts your perception, and makes you question progress that is actually meaningful. You realize that everyone moves at a different pace, with different challenges, different starting points, different circumstances. What matters isn't how quickly you reach a certain level, but how steadily you grow toward it. That perspective allowed you to focus on your own process without being distracted by someone else's timeline. Bond. There's a difference between chasing greatness and becoming it. Chasing implies distance. It suggests that what you want is always ahead of you, always just out of reach. Becoming is different. It's internal. It means you're already moving in alignment with what you're trying to achieve. Your actions reflect it. Your mindset supports it. Your habits reinforce it. You're not trying to look like something. You're building it from within. Bland. That internal shift changes how you approach everything. You no longer rely on external validation to measure your progress. You don't need constant recognition or approval to keep going. Your standards become self-defined. Your motivation becomes self-sustained. You operate with a level of independence that allows you to stay consistent, regardless of external circumstances. You've also started to understand that greatness isn't about perfection. It's not about getting everything right, avoiding mistakes, or presenting a flawless image. It's about growth, resilience, and the ability to adapt. Mistakes aren't signs that you're failing. They're part of the process that shapes you. Each one teaches you something, refines your approach, and pushes you to improve. Instead of fearing them, you've learned to use them. There's a certain discipline that comes with this mindset. It's not driven by emotion or temporary motivation. It's built on commitment. You do the work even when it's inconvenient, even when it's repetitive, even when results aren't immediate. That consistency is what creates long-term progress. It's what separates temporary effort from lasting development. You're no longer waiting for a moment where everything feels perfect before you take yourself seriously. You've already made that decision. You've already started treating your goals with the level of focus and dedication they require. That shift alone puts you in a different position, one where progress becomes inevitable because you're no longer depending on external factors to move forward, And as you continue on this path, the idea of greatness becomes less abstract and more tangible. It's no longer something you imagine. It's something you experience in your daily actions, in your mindset, in your approach. It becomes part of how you operate, part of how you think, part of how you move. You're not chasing something far away anymore. You're stepping into something you're already building. Every decision, every action, every moment of discipline is shaping that reality. And the more consistent you are, the more it becomes clear that this isn't something you're hoping for. It's something you're becoming.